Dzień dobry Państwu.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We would like to welcome you at the press conference after the meeting of the Monetary Policy Council. The conference is attended by Adam Glapiński, Governor of the National Bank of Poland, the Chairman of the MPC, and members of the Monetary Policy Council, Grażyna Cyborowicz and Łukasz Hart. Mr. Governor, the floor is yours. Information from the meeting of the Monetary Policy Council held on the 2nd and 3rd of July 2019. The Council decided to keep the NBP interest rates unchanged, reference rate at 1.5%, lombard rate at 2.5%, deposit rate at 0.5%, and rediscount rate at 1.75%. Incoming data suggests that global economic growth continues at a relatively slow pace amid heightened uncertainty about the global economic outlook in the coming quarters. In the euro area, despite still good situation in the service sector, the pace of economic activity growth remains relatively slow. In the United States, economic conditions stay strong, but recent indicators signal a possible weakening of activity in the coming quarters. In China, incoming data indicated deterioration in economic conditions in 2019 quarter 2. In the recent period, there has been an increased volatility of global oil prices, which are still lower than a year ago. This has been accompanied by an increase in the global prices of some food products. At the same time, inflation in many countries remains moderate. The European Central Bank is keeping interest rates close to zero, including the deposit rate below zero, and reinvests maturing securities bought under the asset purchase program. At the same time, the ECB has extended the period that it intends to keep interest rates unchanged. The U.S. Federal Reserve is keeping interest rates unchanged. The Fed is gradually limiting the pace of its balance sheet reduction, signaling the possibility of loosening monetary policy in the coming quarters. In Poland, economic conditions remain good despite weaker growth abroad. Activity growth is driven by rising consumption, fueled by increasing employment and wages, very high consumer sentiment, and social benefit payments. Incoming data also indicate a continuation of significant growth in investment and exports. In recent months, consumer price growth has increased, which was driven by rising fuel and food prices, as well as higher core inflation. Nonetheless, inflation continues to run at moderate levels. The Council became acquainted with the results of the July projection of inflation and GDP prepared under the assumption of unchanged NBP interest rates. The July projection takes into account data and information published up to 18th of June 2019. In line with the July projection based on the NEC model, there is a 50% probability that the annual price growth will be in the range of 1.7 to 2.3% in 2019, against 1.5 to 2.2% in the March 2019 projection, 1.9 to 3.7% in 2020, compared to 1.7 to 3.6%, and 1.3 to 3.5% in 2021, compared to 1.3 to 3.5%.
Wobec przewidywanych w marcu 1,3 do 3,5%.
At the same time, the annual GDP growth, according to this projection, will be with a 50% probability in the range of 3.9 to 5.1% in 2019, against 3.3 to 4.7% in the March 2019 projection, 3.0 to 4.8% in 2020, compared to 2.7 to 4.6%, and 2.4 to 4.3% in 2021, compared to 2.4 to 4.3%. In the Council's assessment, the outlook for economic conditions in Poland remains favorable, and GDP growth will continue at a relatively high level in the coming years. At the same time, inflation will remain moderate, and in the monetary policy transmission horizon will stay close to the target. Such an assessment is supported by the results of the July NBP projection. The Council judges that the current level of interest rates is conducive to keeping the Polish economy on a sustainable growth path and maintaining macroeconomic stability. The Council adopted the inflation report, July 2019. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Governor. Questions, ladies and gentlemen? Tuszyński, Rafał Tuszyński, the Polish Press Agency, Economic Department.
Chciałbym zacząć od projekcji,
Let me begin with the projection path,
od inflacji bazowej, ponieważ
starting with the core inflation. The inflation path is higher in 2019 and 2020.
Jaka jest struktura tej
What is
inflacji?
the structure of this inflation? Does core inflation within the projection horizon, is it going to be higher compared to previous projection? And what is the path of interest rates? Let me mention my own conviction. I believe that this path of interest rates and this approach since March 2015 is that interest rates are kept unchanged. As regards core inflation, it is going to increase slightly. What is the stabilization horizon as regards interest rates until the end of 2021? Why have you shortened this horizon? Not necessarily, not really. One more question, which is significant, I guess. Lately, there have been changes in rhetorics of the Fed and ECB. What is the prospect of monetary policy easing? And does NBP take into account this approach, what happens in the euro area? As regards this shift in rhetoric, we had information about that during informal meetings of representatives of the ECB and Fed, and now this rhetoric is made public, but we knew about the upcoming shift. And this is due to some formal decisions that information has become public recently. We are well prepared for the shift in the situation. Our interest rates are positive and are stable. Interest rates are positive. Our fiscal situation is perfect. So due to our approach, we have reached such a situation and we have a space for decisions in terms of monetary policy. No changes are needed at the moment and will not be needed in the nearest future within the horizon that we can predict, unless there are some unexpected events. We are positively surprised that despite the deterioration of the economic situation in Germany, Germany is our main partner, still entrepreneurs are developing their activity in Poland and exports are growing and inflation is not rising very quickly. Right, so as regards higher inflation and a little high inflation path, when can we expect the peak of it? Next year, inflation is going to rise and is going to go down later on. What is the maximum peak? You are going to see it in projection on Monday at 12. These are not dramatic changes. Next question.
Okay.
Dorota Bartyzel.
Dzień dobry. To ja bym się chciała
Przez cały
As
przewidywany
regards
okres
the
projekcji
projection horizon, we
utrzymujemy
are
się w
within
celu
the target.
Chciałabym zapytać o
As regards the
reakcję na te
reaction
projekcje,
to
zwłaszcza
projections
po tym, co stało
after
się
what has
ze wzrostem
happened
cen
to
konsumpcyjnych
consumer
od początku
prices
tego
and
roku.
what has happened.
Czy byli, ceny
Prices,
w
the
Polsce,
dynamics
dynamika
of
wzrostu
price
cen
growth, consumer
konsumpcyjnych w
prices
Polsce była
is the
najwyższa w Unii
highest in
Europejskiej.
the
W żadnym
EU.
innym kraju ceny
In
nie
no
rosły tak
other
szybko jak w
EU
Polsce.
member
Tak nie
state
można
the
Można tak powiedzieć, panie
prices
prezesie,
were growing so
dlatego, że
fast.
oczywiście inflacja nie
Of
jest
course,
najwyższa w
inflation
Polsce, to
is
jest
not
jasne,
at
ale
the
ja nie mówię o
highest
poziomie
level in the
inflacji, ja
EU.
mówię
I
o
am
tempie
saying
Poszczególnych
wzrostu.
that
produktach.
consumer
Ja mówię o,
prices
ja mówię o całym
have
tempie wzrostu.
increased
Zachęcam
dramatically.
wszystkich, żeby
You can
zajrzeli do
take
Bloomberga. Mamy bardzo
at the
piękny
chart
czart zrobiony,
at
który
the
doskonale tę
Bloomberg
dynamikę
website and
właśnie
you can see
odwzorowuje.
this dynamics.
Chciałabym zapytać,
So you are
Co pani mówi, że
saying
najszybciej w
that
Polsce
consumer
wzrosną?
prices
ceny
have risen
konsumpcyjne.
dramatically.
Najszybciej w Polsce wzrosły ceny
No mówimy
żywności,
o
Yeah,
tak?
yeah, I'm saying about
Tak.
consumer
Chciałabym
prices.
zapytać w takim razie, nie wchodząc już tak w szczegóły,
Right,
czy
without
państwo nie
going
byli
into
zaskoczeni, że
detail,
projekcja nie pokazuje
projections
wyższej
do not
inflacji?
show higher
Dlatego,
inflation
że
rates
z
that we
modeli,
would
które
expect,
myślę, że są w sumie podobne,
and
stosują
economists
wynika, że przewidują inflację jednak na wyższym poziomie.
foresee
Zarówno w tym
higher
roku,
levels
jak
of
i w
inflation
przyszłym
this
roku.
year and next
I
year.
to jest
What
podstawowe.
models are you talking
About?
about? Central banks are using models that we are
No nic, to w
using,
każdym razie
and
moje pytanie
we do
jest
not
takie,
see
czy-
any unexpected
Moje
situations
pytanie jest
here.
takie, czy państwo nie byli
Were you
przyjemnie
not
zaskoczeni tym, że
positively
inflacja
surprised
pokazana w
that
projekcie
projection
nie
doesn't
jest
show
wyższa? To
higher
jest jedno.
levels
A drugie,
of
co się stało z cenami
inflation as
energii?
we
Jakie
would
ceny
expect?
energii zostały,
And
jaki
next
poziom cen
issue,
energii
energy
został uwzględniony w tej
prices.
projekcji na
In the
przyszły
projection
rok?
for
To
the
tak na
next year,
początek.
what type of energy prices have you taken into account? We do take into account the rise in energy prices next year in accordance with the decisions made by the government. I don't know, I'm not aware of economic models that would indicate higher levels of inflation. We have key models used by other central banks, and it is the best possible approach. And our projections have always been very accurate, more accurate even compared to projections in other countries. We cannot be ashamed of our results because they are very accurate. So I disagree with you. Consumer prices are not rocketing. There is a moderate growth, and inflation is within the inflation target band. So inflation is not high. Sometimes it goes up, sometimes down. Compared to the midpoint of the center of oscillation within of our inflation band, target band, so it was around 2.5, and we have never taken radical steps. 0.2% upwards is the latest movement, so it is within the statistical error band. So we can say that next year inflation is going to increase a little bit, but is going to decrease a year later. So we are within the inflation target band.
Mrs. Professor and Mr. Professor, does your perception of the price growth is similar? And I understand that at the previous council meeting, you discussed more the deviation, discrepancies between the CPI index and the perception of polls. I would like to ask you here, we have only experts, so let's not speak about the sentiment of polls. Inflation is a statistical phenomenon, and the rise in prices of some food, well, some consumers struggle with it, and some don't. Some have some budget and they cannot
Ja rozumiem,
allow themselves to buy something, but others, well, they don't suffer due to it. And the prices have risen more than dynamics in the previous period, but other food items did not, well, the prices did not increase. For example, beef did not, the prices of beef did not rise, and eggs, their prices have decreased. Now the parsley is, the price is lower, but vegetables, their prices have gone higher. And no one can influence this. This is just temporary. Well, despite those particular items, food prices have risen by 5.6%, according to the estimates. I would like to go back to my question, Mrs. Professor Antsiprovich. Well, we dealt with a similar situation in 2017, because from January, inflation started to accelerate according to the national methodology, and we had some alarming opinions among environments, and we heard that we would have an even more accelerating inflation at the end of the year. Well, and after this temporary price growth, the prices went back to their path, and it didn't seem that the target would be reached. Well, it can happen in 1 month that this indicator will go above this 3.5%, but it doesn't. It's not sufficient to change the policy of the Council. As regards the sentiment, it seems to me that there is a situation. I haven't noticed any bad sentiment. Our citizens are polarized. There are very rich people, but the majority is not rich, and the same price growth will have a different effect in small villages or towns, and it will look differently in big cities, and it stems from the consumer model. We have this subjective perception of poor people. We have this subjective perception of poor people and the legal perception of poor people. But I have never heard, if I am to be honest, even in the deflation period, that there will be a general opinion that prices are not high, despite the prices and despite the indicators which are calculated properly, correctly. Well, this was the main statistical office, and I don't believe that there would be any main errors in the calculations, but in the indicators of maintenance of households, I cannot remember any situation, even in the period of persistent deflation, that we could say that in the media or among polls and their opinions that were uttered, that someone would say that prices do not grow. So right now, I would just patiently wait for the developments. As if we take the forecast of the National Bank of Poland, they were very reliable. And there are some other forecasts that have proven right. So I cannot see the reason to undermine the projection that will be given to you in detail. And you will see for yourself that also this time, with 100% probability, I can say that the National Bank of Poland will be right. I would like to draw your attention to the following. we have a serious election challenge. A lot can change after the election, but some consequences of some decisions can transfer to the economic situation and the inflation. But we will have the November projection, and there will be some declarations that we will change this or that. It will be in the manifestos of different parties, because the manifestos will also speak about the economic situation. And in November, if it transpires, which doesn't seem probable, but still, if it transpires that our projections have to be corrected, undoubtedly we will correct them. But the probability that we will have to change the indicators significantly, the indicators that we are presenting now in the general plan, are very improbable. For now, there is no questioning of the data presented by the main statistical office and the consumer basket. We take it, we operate on average prices. Anyone who goes shopping can see that vegetable prices have grown, but it's only 2.5 or 2.6% of a budget of households. So we analyze average prices, but some products can, well, their prices could have grown, or their prices could have decreased. We note the prices, we accept the prices, or we take the prices data from the main statistical office, and we have not heard anyone questioning the reliability of the prices given by the main statistical office. There is the European Statistical Office. The methods are the same in various European countries. They are taken based on the budget and consumer baskets. So we take everything into consideration. There are some new tendencies among Poles that have to be taken into account in the baskets. Some products should not be in the basket because they are not representative due to globalization and online shopping. But the main or the core items of the baskets do not change. Professor Hart, thank you for this question. The fact that the inflation has accelerated a little bit doesn't mean that we have very high prices in Poland. And the fact that Professor Bartyzel has mentioned, Poland is not a country where the inflation is the highest in Europe. Please look at the inflation in Hungary or in Romania. I will not speak about Romania. I have to interrupt. You're speaking about the inflation level. I'm speaking about the acceleration of inflation. Well, in the direct target strategy that we have been carrying out in the Council, we do not take the strategy reacting to the level of prices. The dynamics we understand as an annual dynamic of prices according to the presumptions of the monetary policy. If we were to use the strategy on influencing the price level, we have to go back to the deflation a few years ago, and we would have to tolerate a very high inflation temporarily. We will not do it because we take the strategy of the direct target. We have gone beyond this level, but we are still in the deviation band from 2.5. As regards my opinion, it seems to me that this inflation will accelerate in the nearest future, as Mr. Governor has said. the peak of the inflation will be at the beginning of 2020, but if the growth tendency were to continue after the beginning of 2020, this would be a new situation, and I would be conducive to changing my opinion. But right now, we don't know this. We will know a lot more in November. With the November projection, we'll see whether we are dealing with the permanent price growth or whether this process will stop. Right now, it seems to me that it does not influence the interest rates, but we will see what will happen with the inflation. I'm more prone to adapting right now than before. It speaks about the rhetorics of other central banks. They thought that their monetary policy would be toughening, but they chose a more safe approach.
Thank you. We have this space for decisions in terms of fiscal policy and monetary policy. We have positive interest rates, unlike some of the Western European countries where interest rates are close to zero. And we have a very positive fiscal situation, budgetary situation, so there is a space for maneuver. We have a child benefit program, 500 plus, and other programs which are conducive to development of economic situation. Augustyniak, Polish Radio. I wanted to ask a question, but after Professor Ręceparowicz's reply, I have another question. As regards November projection, it has been mentioned that we are going to face election, and you've said that let's hope changes are not going to be dramatic. I'm not sure you are not going to understand me in a proper way, because I have no impact on the way our words are interpreted. I've just mentioned elections, and depending on the situation after the election, we shall wait and see what is going to happen. Let us not focus on the election, dear Professor. How about fiscal policy? We are just saying that the continuation of fiscal policy is not certain, because there might be some changes. There are some changes as regards pension schemes and so on. So we shall wait and see whether it's going to be conducive to inflation or deflation. I'm saying about freezing energy prices for households. In our assumptions, we have taken into account the following approach, that until the end of this year, energy prices are going to be frozen. But we are not sure the situation will remain unchanged in the future. We don't know what it's going to look like in the future. I'm not even speaking about other areas of uncertainty. So my opinion is that we will clarify some of the issues in late October, maybe a little bit earlier, and we're going to have hard data as regards inflation. As regards projection that we have now, it is accurate based on the knowledge we have at hand, and we cannot undermine it, and we are not expecting inflation to rise above the target tolerance band, despite the fact that there are some changes, increases in consumer prices, because they might decrease in the future, and it shall be taken into account. I'm not going to go into detail, because colleagues are going to discuss it in detail. And from the point of view of monetary policy, there are no threats as regards meeting the target. 2.9 growth next year, and then decrease to 2.5, so we are within the target tolerance band, 2.5% plus minus 1%, as you are well aware of. So everything is in accordance with our expectations. And we are closer to the upper bound of the target tolerance band. Maybe hence are these concerns, but it is within the target tolerance bound. Within the target tolerance bound, you were not surprised when we were close to the lower bound, and now there are concerns. As regards the new governor of the European Central Bank, what are your expectations? Maybe there are going to be some potential pressures, some pressures as regards Poland and our accession to the euro area. The National Bank of Poland is independent, and it is not and will not be under any pressure. Governor Lagarde has no intention or right to put pressure on central banks. You might only ask me whether I'm going to put pressure on Governor Lagarde. I'm not going to do that. I've known her for years. We met during different conferences and seminars. I am aware of her opinions and her attitudes and the importance of the parity, of the empowerment of women. And in Poland, we meet parity of 50% as regards managerial staff, directors at the National Bank of Poland, so we meet the parity target. And she's not necessarily very strict. So if you expect there will be some pressure on interest rate policy so that we increase them, it's quite the opposite. We can expect something quite the opposite. Mario Draghi spoke publicly about that, and people were saying he was going to resign, so he was able to say that, but it's not true. Governors who step down are very sincere in their wording. Mario Draghi put it quite clearly that as regards monetary policy easing, the ECB is going to continue easing compared to the previous cycle, and we are going to exceed the limits in terms of monetary policy easing that were introduced earlier. And despite negative interest rates, in some of the countries, there will be further easing. So there is a policy of assisting economic activity, not tightening, but assistance and promotion of economic activity. We are not scared of inflation. We are afraid of the increase in unemployment or even maybe deflation. And in Europe, there are some issues that we have to deal with. For us, these conclusions are important, but we are doing well. And Poles are not happy about these concerns, not because we believe we are better, but we have a better situation. We didn't have this volatility, no decrease in economic activity, the decrease of GDP. We have good economic growth and moderate inflation. These days, you can say it is the lack of inflation when it is around 2%. Of course, books are important to me and prices of books are important for me, but maybe some people do not buy books. For someone, vegetables are very important because they cook vegetable soup but some people do not pay attention to it. So foodstuffs mentioned here, vegetables and pork, their prices have increased. But eggs used to be very expensive, and now they are by 7% cheaper. And butter, the price of butter used to increase in the past. But fruit, for example, apples are much cheaper now, or milk is cheaper, or cucumber. I do some shopping sometimes, but usually my wife does shopping, so I'm not that well aware of food product prices. Of course, it is important, and some have an impression that everything is more expensive, but we are the central bank. We look at macro phenomena, and we take into account average prices, and we are not in charge of social policy, and we analyze the situation from the macro level, taking into account such indicators as inflation, employment and unemployment, and so on and so forth.
It's hard for me to assess the nomination of the new governor of the European Central Bank. We know the opinions of Mrs. Lagarde. There is some probability of some easing of the policy of the European Central Bank, and the probability is bigger. But I will not comment on the details, or we will not say what the optimum policy of the European Central Banks would be, according to our opinion. Well, there were some opinions that she would be tougher, or she would be easing the policy, but the decisions are always taken collectively. I always speak on behalf of the bank, and it seems that I decide on my own. But there is a regulation in the bank that the governor contacts the environment, but the decisions are taken by a 10-member council, and it's executed by a many-member board, and it's preceded by some analysis. There are some departments with very prominent experts and analysts, and we are supported by a whole apparatus of services. So it's not there is no arbitrariness in our activities. There can be some pessimism, but it does not influence the ongoing decisions. Our policy is to keep stable interest rates, and we have been keeping them since March 2015, but it's not that we have come up with this idea. This is an objective situation. It does not that all members of the Council should be of the same opinion. Today, I have to say that the opinions were very different. There are members of different institutions, and they have the same data on the table or in the computer, on the screen, but they draw different conclusions, and they have different projections. But we have our analysts and experts to take all those data into the econometric models and see what they get, plus the correction of the experts, etc., etc. But this projection is not a strange phenomenon that goes far away from the opinions expressed by economists. I have not written how many economists have expected a change in the interest rates, probably one or two. Well, if the situation was to change, then the interest rates will change. I believe that until the end of the term, they will not change. But as Mr. Hart has said, we will react accordingly. Some have very decisive opinions about the next quarters or years, but others are more optimistic. And the path
ta ścieżka, którą my
that
ostatecznie
we are
wyznaczamy, to jest
drawing is a
50%.
50% probability on both sides. On both sides, this probability is smaller, but it's still very high. Well, an event with a 50% probability of happening is a high probability. We are not sure if there will be a war with Iran. Well, anything can happen. Oil is getting cheaper, and it should get cheaper according to the situation with the economic activity. Well, how can anyone say what will be the weather prognosis for the next year? There are some who believe in the warming. There are some who do not take into account this probability. Well, we are not talking about presumptions. Well, there are small companies that use loans. For them, our policy is very good because it's very transparent and it's very easy to foresee what's going to happen in the future. Because for companies, the worst thing is uncertainty. Please remember that there are also some elements that, well, there are some developments that happen, and it's independent on us. There are some exchange rates that influence the inflation, and the appreciation of Polish zloty is done against the dollar. There are some national pressures, there are some other developments, but the depreciation of Polish zloty works. We take it into attention. Thank you very much for today's meeting. We would like to invite you to the Monday inflation report.